I want to talk about all of this further tonight with an assembled group of space experts. With me in Washington now is Florida Congressman Bill Nelson, who recently completed a shuttle flight, and in New York tonight, former Apollo astronaut David Scott, who's now president of a rocket company. In Houston, Alan Bean, a man who walked on the moon and helped train the NASA astronauts who are there today, and he's there with Gerald Griffin, former director of the Johnson Space Center. And in San Diego tonight, one of the original members of the astronaut corps, Wally Schirra. We want to talk first of all with Congressman Nelson. It was just 2 weeks ago that you lifted off. Do you think that we have oversold this space program and the space shuttle program in terms of what it can do, because this was such a shock to so many people?
Of course it was a shock. It was a shock to all of us. No, we haven't oversold it. We've had some 24 exceptionally successful flights. And the system works well. Obviously, there was a major malfunction that is tragedy today. We'll find out what the problem is, and we'll fix it. And the space shuttle will continue to be America's way to go into space and return. It's important to the future of this country.
But when you went for that ride 2 weeks ago, were you forewarned by NASA that something like this could happen? You know that there's a risk involved, but this is a calamity of a magnitude that no one anticipated.
Every member of the crew understands there's a risk. You don't expect that this kind of tragedy is going to occur. We had a malfunction right after we cleared the tower. And immediately, our pilot, Charlie Bolden, jumped on it, corrected the malfunction, and you know the perfection of our mission. That was not to be today.
David Scott in New York, you're now president of a rocket company. Do you think that we've got too much invested in the manned space shuttle program? A lot of people are talking today about the use of unmanned vehicles just to launch satellites and other things. Is that a better way for us to go in the future?
Well, I think, Tom, there must be a balance between the manned and the unmanned programs. I think each has its role to play. But in general, I believe we can proceed further into the exploration and utilization of space with manned programs because of man's natural ability to judge things, evaluate things, and use his mind as a computer. But there are roles for both manned and unmanned vehicles.
And Wally Schirra in San Diego, as you watched all of this unfold today, as you've been there since day one, what was your reaction to what you saw?
Tom, when I first saw it, I was quite surprised. I hear you fine. Who's cutting in?
Why don't you just keep on talking to me, Wally, and ignore that other voice if you can.
Hello, Tom. I'm kind of warm out here in California.
Right.
The Ma Bell isn't working too well for us, but the shock I had this morning was seeing not instant replay, but almost instant, of debris coming down, and I began to think, my God, it finally happened. After 25 years, we lucked out that long. The statistics finally caught up to us. Of course, we felt that this could happen to us any time, but we decided it shouldn't happen, and we changed the name from rocket to booster, assuming that it would be safer that way. But I can recall going through Mercury and Gemini with what were rockets, and finally flying on that Apollo with a man-made rocket or a man-made booster, which is what we saw today. It just turns out that eventually we're going to find something going wrong.
All right, Mr. Scott, Mr. Schirra, you're both highly trained astronauts. What about the idea of putting a civilian in space? And then we'll get Bill Nelson's reaction to that as well. Do you think that's a good idea?
Well, I think that naturally civilians have a role in space because the civilians have roles everywhere. And as we expand into space, explore the universe, and conduct our science, I think we can't limit that just to the military, although, as you well know, the military also has a role in space.
And what about you, Wally? Do you think that we should continue to put civilians in space?
Well, of course, Tom. It's like an airplane. We've had some horrible accidents in the calendar year '85 with aircraft, and anything you do is high risk. When we think of gasoline that we carry in an automobile, that could be a bomb, too, if it's hit the wrong way. So it's a case of just realizing that what we do when we move around is very high risk.
And Mr. Griffin at the Johnson Space Center in Houston tonight, this is going to be a terrible setback for NASA, isn't it?
Well, obviously, Tom, it's a great personal loss for many of us, and it's also a situation that we've got to understand and correct. Anytime you have something like this, I'd have to call it a setback, but we've had them before, and we're at the point now where we've got to get on and understand this problem and correct it, and I think we can come back from it.
Do you think it's a good idea to continue the civilian in space program?
Well, yes, I think you've got to take a step back. And today we are worried about the events of today and mostly yesterday and tomorrow. But as you really think about what we're trying to do in space, it's not just to put people into orbit in the shuttle. We are literally trying to build a whole infrastructure, ultimately, that will allow us to completely expand and take full advantage of this rather new ocean that we have spent 25 years getting to the point where we are today. As a part of that, obviously, civilians of all walks of life I think, will ultimately inhabit that infrastructure. And there's no time better than today to begin that.
Congressman Nelson, I know that the space shuttle program is important to you personally and to your district as well, but we do have an enormous investment in that single program. Wouldn't it be a better idea for the United States to spread it out a little bit, to have more unmanned rockets, for example, in addition to the shuttle program? We've got so much invested in the shuttle itself.
Well, we do have investments. The Air Force continues to have an expendable launch vehicle, and they're planning that through the next decade. But we developed the shuttle to be America's space transportation system, and there's no reason that it can't continue to be once we find out what was the cause of this tragedy. I think that we'll find the problem, we'll correct the problem, then we'll go on from there.
All right, Congressman Nelson, thank you very much. Mr. Griffin in Houston tonight, in New York, Mr. Scott in San Diego, Wally Schirra. This has been, I know, a personal tragedy for all of you because you've all been involved in the program. Tonight, some of the shuttle's heat-resistant tiles are washing up, and they're being collected by people on the Florida coastline near Cape Canaveral. Those are the small tiles that we've made so much of over the years of the shuttle program. They protect it once it begins to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. The search for debris from the explosion is continuing tonight in other parts of the Atlantic in an area that is 60 miles wide and 120 miles long. And NBC's David Hazinski reports on that development.
Pieces of debris that have been recovered so far are being brought to the airbase at Cape Canaveral, where they'll be examined later. The explosion that blew apart Challenger spread debris over a wide area. 10 aircraft searched a 1,200-mile grid into the night and will go out again at first light tomorrow. At least 11 ships, including NASA, Coast Guard, and Navy vessels, are continuing the search for wreckage overnight. NASA has warned commercial fishing and private boaters to leave alone any wreckage they find and just report it to authorities. A NASA spokesman says it's critical that the wreckage not be disturbed and warned that some of it could be dangerous.
There were explosives aboard the shuttle, the solid rocket boosters. There was also toxic chemicals, hydrogen tetroxide, other acids, hydrazine, which are all very, very toxic.
Ocean depth at the crash point is only between 100 and 200 feet deep. NASA is expected to talk to the Navy tomorrow about bringing in divers or subs to recover any sunken wreckage that it finds. David Hazinski, NBC News at the Kennedy Space Center.
The official investigation into what went wrong today could take months. More about that now from NBC News science correspondent Robert Bazell, who has covered the space shuttle since it began. He's at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena tonight. Bob, we've already heard from Jess Moore that they're impounding even the notes of the people who were involved today, the technicians, and it looks like they're going to get the tapes and all the other telemetry as well, and it could be some time before we know anything. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, it's a very difficult task. It's what engineers call failure analysis. They have to, if they possibly can, to recreate the incident, either in a laboratory or some kind of model so that they understand exactly what went wrong. Because until that happens, it's very clear that the shuttle can't fly again, and that's a necessary aspect to this investigation. Now, there are several lines of inquiry going on. They will study models of the rockets. They'll study every bit of data, every bit of voice communication, anything that could have gone on in the maintenance, anything that may have been seen by anybody during the entire process leading up to the launch and in that first minute and 15 seconds before the tragedy. It will take a long time. One of the crucial elements, as David Hazinski just pointed out, will be reassembling whatever debris is found in an Air Force Base locker down there in Florida. Anything could yield a clue. At this point, there are several hypotheses, and the one that we have heard mentioned the most often is that a piece of a fan in one of the main engines broke apart that flew through the edge of the main engine and then went into that external fuel tank, causing the external fuel tank to rupture and become a bomb. That's only a hypothesis. That's the one that we've heard the most often today, but it's going to take a lot of investigation until they find out exactly what went wrong.
Well, let's go over a couple of things that we do know, Bob. First of all, everything seemed very normal right up to the moment of explosion. In fact, it was so normal that as you heard the NASA commentator, he continued to talk about what he was seeing in his own telemetry. By then, the explosion had already occurred. The second point is, it appeared to me that the explosion was so thorough, so complete, that there's a good chance that that debris is so small and so shattered that they won't learn anything from it. Is that realistic?
Well, that certainly is. I mean, the NASA commentator, who is a public affairs officer, was looking at a different screen from his television screen, and it continued to tell him how far downrange it was. That was why he kept talking like that. It certainly is possible that it blew the whole thing apart in such a way that no clues will be found, but there is a lot of data that comes down besides the astronauts' voices, indicating the performance of each of the engines, the 3 main engines and the 2 solid rocket boosters that were going at that time, all the guidance systems and everything else on board. If there was any anomaly at all, anything at all went wrong, it should have shown up at that point. It wasn't hit by a foreign object. That was very clear. It was an explosion that occurred on board.